What's up guys, and welcome to my 4.2 updated Feixiao guide. In this video I'm taking you over everything you do need to know in order to understand and Builder, including a kit overview, best Lightcones, best Relics and Planar Ornaments, the main stats you want to run for main sets and substats, and finally some general team building ideas. Stuck grinding in Honkai Star Rail? Need Stellar Jades fast? We've got you covered. Head over to U7 Buy, your ultimate gaming hub for save fast and cheap in-game top-ups. Whether it's Star Rail or your other favorite games, U7 delivers instantly and players love it. Check out their Trustpilot reviews, they're actually top ranked. On the Honkai Star Rail direct top-up page, you can recharge your account in seconds. For example, 8080 Honorific shards cost $99.99 in the official store. However, on U7 Buy, you can see the price is cheaper. When you head over to U7 Buy, you might notice that the storefront display prices currently match the in-game store, but don't worry, the magic happens at checkout. Once you click the Buy Now button, your total instantly drops to our actual discounted price only. Just pick your server, enter UID, pay securely, and boom, your account is instantly loaded. Want extra savings? Use code PRETSR at checkout for 5% off, perfect for last-minute pulls, battle passes, or surprising a friend. And here's a bonus. If you spend $80 a month on U7 Buy, you can grab the Honkai Star Rail Express Pass for only 1 cent, which is nearly free. Click on the link in my description, recharge fast, save more, and keep blazing those trails. Feixiao's basic attack does wind damage based off her attack to a designated enemy. Her skill also does wind damage based off her attack to a designated enemy and will launch an instance of her talent's follow-up attack against the target you did attack. Her ultimate deals wind damage to a designated enemy up to 700% of Feixiao's attack, which will ignore the weakness type and reduce the target's weakness. If the target is not weakness broken, Feixiao's weakness break efficiency will be increased by 100%. In ultimate, you are able to launch either Bolt Thunder Blitz or War Axe Skyward for a total of 6 times, and at the end will deal wind damage based off 160% of Feixiao's attack to the target. Bolt Thunder Blitz will do wind damage equal to 60% of Feixiao's attack to the chosen target. If the enemy target is weakness broken, the damage multiplier increases by 30%. War Axe Skyward will do the same 60% wind damage of her attack to the chosen target. However, the 30% increase to the damage multiplier is if the target is not weakness broken. Her talent lets Feixiao activate her ultimate when Flying Aureus reaches 6 points, accumulating up to 12. Feixiao gains a point of Flying Aureus for every 2 attacks done by allied targets, and Feixiao's ultimate doesn't count towards her ultimate. When Feixiao's teammates attack an enemy target, Feixiao will launch a follow-up attack against the primary target, doing wind damage based off their attack, and the effect can trigger once per turn, and the trigger count will reset at the start of Feixiao's turn. Using this attack will increase damage dealt by Feixiao for 60% for 2 turns. Her technique lets Feixiao enter the on-rush state, where she is able to pull in enemies and increase her own movement speed by 50%, and entering battle will gain a point of Flying Aureus. Entering battle with Feixiao's technique active will do wind damage equal to 200% of her attack to all enemies at the start of each wave, which is also guaranteed to crit. If more than 1 enemy is pulled in, the multiplier of the damage is increased by 100% for each additional enemy pulled in, up to a maximum of 1000%. For bonus chases, her A2 allows her to start the battle with 3 Flying Aureus. At the start of the turn, if no follow-up attacks were launched via a talent in previous turns, then this will count as 1 toward the number of attacks to gain Flying Aureus. Her A4, when using ultimate to do damage to an enemy, it is considered follow-up attack, and follow-up attacks crit damage is increased by 36%, and her A6 increases Feixiao's attack by 48% for 3 turns when using skill. For Eidolons, her E1 will be for when she launches Bolt Thunder Blitz or War Axe Skyward. Ultimate damage will additionally increase by an amount equal to 10% of the original damage that stacks up to 5 times and lasts until the end of the ultimate. Her E2 will now make it to where the talent's effect where every 1 instance of follow-up attacks launched by the team will give Feixiao a full stack of Flying Aureus that triggers up to 6 times per turn. So the regular attacks that your team does still give her half a charge like her talent does, but for follow-up attacks you will get a full if you do have this active. Her E4 increases toughness reduction from her talent's follow-up attack by 100%, and launching it will increase Feixiao's speed by 8% for 2 turns. And her E6 increases the alt-type res pen of her ultimate damage by 20%. Talent's follow-up attack is now considered ultimate damage at the same time, and the multiplier increases by 140%. For her best Lightcone options, her best one is still her own signature Lightcone, providing 15% crit rate for the wearer. The wearer launching a follow-up attack will give a stack of Lumen Flux that stack up to 2 times, with each stack of Lumen Flux enabling the ultimate damage dealt by the wearer to ignore 27% of the target's defense. When the wearer's turn ends, it removes a stack of Lumen Flux. Very simple, yet extremely effective. Crit rate is very important on Feixiao. You want to have 100% on this character. If you don't, it's very rough. So the extra crit rate this does provide is helpful, and you are able to get up to a 54% defense ignore for her ultimate, which is insane. That's more than half the value you would need to completely ignore the enemy's defense, and especially with her new teammate Astral, that pairs super well. She launches follow-up attacks a lot, so it's very easy to stack this, and her ultimate is ultimate damage, so that is going to be getting the main effect of this. And just to ensure it's stacked, it is removed at the end of her turn, so it's very easy to keep uptime on it, so you make sure you do have it when you are going crazy. Far and none, this is still her best option you could possibly use. If you don't have that, you could use Ratio Signature Lightcone for a 20% increase to crit damage and a further increase to crit damage dealt by 8% for every debuff on the enemy, stacking up to 3 times. Where using ultimate to attack the enemy will receive the Disputation effect, which will allow the wearer's damage dealt to increase by 36% and follow-up attacks to ignore 24% of the target's defense that stacks up to 2 times. Unfortunately, it doesn't provide crit rate, so it does make her a little harder to build to get to that 100% crit rate, but you get 20% crit damage and an additional 24% if you have all 3 debuffs stacked on the enemy, which would be required from other teammates, since Feixiao unfortunately doesn't inflict debuffs. However, a lot of her teammates do inflict debuffs. Topaz does it, Cypher does it, Ashville does it, so it's very easy. And you do use your ultimate to attack, so you are able to gain the Disputation effect to give herself a 36% increase to damage, which is alright, but mainly for the follow-up attacks to ignore 24% of the target's defense. And her ultimate is in fact considered a follow-up attack alongside being considered ultimate damage, so it is getting the 24% defense ignore here. So the more you stack up defense ignore / shred values, the further the value of this Lightcone increases, but it is still the second best option you can possibly use on her. Astral's signature is also usable on her with an 18% increase to crit rate. Start of the battle or 4 follow-up instances will allow the wearer to gain Umbra Devourer for 3 turns. Holding Umbra Devourer will increase the wearer's attack by 40% and damage taken by all enemies by 20%, and effects of the same type cannot stack. Slightly more supportive, but it does give you 18% crit rate as opposed to 15% like our signature does, so this is a little more crit rate. 40% attack is also good, and vulnerability is also nice, assuming you are not already overcapping on a lot of vulnerability. This also allows her to make the team do somewhat more damage since it is a vulnerability, so everyone on your team hitting an enemy with that vulnerability stack will do more damage. So 18% crit rate and 40% attack for Feixiao, with 20% vulnerability for the team, which also includes her, so this would be the next best option you can use on her. You can also use Topaz's Lightcone for 18% crit rate increase and 30% increase the damage dealt by follow-up attacks. The way using a follow-up attack on the enemy will inflict the tame state up to 2 times against enemies, and attacking enemies under the tame state will increase crit damage dealt by 12%. So also 18% crit rate and also just extra damage to her main source of follow-up attacks, so her ultimate and the actual follow-up attack, and you can get up to 24% increase to crit damage dealt to those enemies, so this is also somewhat supportive, but that supportive ability is affecting Feixiao's damage as well, so this would be another good option you can use. The Hunt Lightcone at Herta's shop is also fine with an 8% crit rate increase that doubles when attacking an enemy with 50% or less HP, and defeating an enemy will increase their attack, and defeating an enemy will increase the wearer's attack by 20%. S5, both values of crit rate become 16% and also 40% attack defeating an enemy. A lot of crit rate, 32% is very high. However, even with this, I always say this for anyone using this Lightcone, you don't want to fully build around this part because there's going to be a good portion of the time you're attacking an enemy that isn't below 50% HP. So if you actually build up to 84% crit rate, there's going to be that whole 50% where you're not actually having guaranteed crits and it's going to bite you. You usually want to use this as the last little bit to cover 5%-ish because it's more easier that way. So it still does allow you to focus on the other sets a little more, but you still don't want to use it, but it's still a lot of crit rate. And then you just need to make sure you do defeat an enemy, which can be someone on the sides, an elite, whatever, just so you get the actual 40% attack, or the performance of the Lightcone drops a lot. So for a free-to-play option, this is still very strong. You can also use Swordplay, which will increase the wearer's damage dealt by 8% for every time the wearer attacks the same target that stacks up to 5 times and is dispelled when changing targets. At S5, it is 16% for each stack, so getting up to an 80% damage dealt increase to that enemy you're attacking is very solid. However, this does make her a lot more restrictive to play because especially with single targets, there are times where you are going to be shifting enemies a lot. So unfortunately, this does make her a lot more restrictive in playstyle. You have to toggle that enemy, but when you are gunning down an elite or boss, they are very tanky nowadays especially. So getting the full effect of this is quick, plus she has a follow-up attack, so it's very easy to stack it. And then in her ultimate, she hits multiple times anyways, so you can stack it in one ultimate. So if you have none of the other options available, this is the one you would want to use. Just as good, if not slightly better, if you do have this compared to Swordplay, would be the Battle Pass Lightcone See You at the end, for a 24% increase to crit damage for the wearer, and a skill damage and follow-up damage increase by 24% as well. At S5, it becomes 40% for both values. Very simple, more crit damage, unfortunately no crit rate, but that's fine, as long as you can build up the difference. Her skill does hit, it's not the main source of damage, but it is still something you do, but it's mainly for the fact it increases follow-up damage. So the actual follow-up and her ultimate are going to do more damage, which makes this the best 4-star option you can use. For best relic sets, her best in slot is 4-piece Eagle, 2-piece increasing wind damage by 10%, 4-piece the wearer using their ultimate will advance their action by 25%. Rare case where Eagle actually has an effective 2-piece since she is wind, and the 4-piece is able to provide an advance forward, and this is so effective on Feixiao because you get multiple ultimates as opposed to people that have regular energy, providing the fact you have enough frequency to build it, but even at E0, even more so at E2, if you have E2, this actually further becomes their best. You get enough ultimates to the point it's actually going to net you an extra turn usually. This also is a very big enabler of just using attack boots, and is just a very effective set on her. You'll be doing less damage per hit as opposed to the set I'm going to talk about after this, but you'll be netting more turns as opposed to the other set usually, which is why this relic set is the best in slot overall, especially now where you do want to get as much frequency as possible for more ultimates. If not Eagle, you still can use the Wind Soaring set with the 2-piece increasing attack by 12%, 4-piece provides 6% crit rate, the wearer using a follow-up attack will increase damage up by ultimate by 36% for 1 turn. Simple yet effective, 2-piece will increase all forms of damage since she does attack skill. 4-piece makes her a little easier to build with some extra crit rate, which is very neat. Requirement is very easy, you just use a follow-up attack, the actual follow-up attack counts, her ultimate counts, and then the damage up for the actual ultimate, which is the biggest source of damage, almost all of it, will be increased by 36% for 1 turn. So throughout that ultimate, you're just going to be doing more damage. So this would be the second best option you can use. Eagle is better, but Wind Soaring is still very solid. Those are the only 4 pieces you want to use nowadays. If you want to combine 2 pieces while you farm for one of them, you can do 2-piece Eagle with 2-piece Grand Duke, as the 2-piece of Grand Duke does provide 20% follow-up damage increase. You can also do 2-piece Pioneer if someone on the team is debuffing enemies consistently, which usually they always will, or 2-piece of any of those with an attack percent increasing set, so 2-piece Hero, 2-piece Wind Soaring, 2-piece Prisoner, or 2-piece Musketeers. Crit sets are also valid. If you do need crit rate, you can use World Remaking Delivered, 2-piece or Scholar for the 8% crit rate. If you want more crit damage, 2-piece Wave Strider with 2-piece Everglorious. For Planar Ornaments, our best in slot is still running Durin. For each follow-up attack a ally uses, the wearer gains a stack of merit that stacks up to 5 times, providing up to a 5% increase to follow-up damage with each merit stack. Reaching 5 stacks will also increase the wearer's crit damage by 25%. So this is very easy to stack up because this also does include Feixiao's follow-up attack, so it's not just the team. On this team, you'll stack it up almost instantly, and you get up to a 25% increase to follow-up damage with a 25% increase to crit damage at the same time. So for the most bang to your stats, this is by far the best for her damage. You can also use Salsado with an 8% crit rate, and reaching 50% or higher will increase damage up by wearer's ultimate and follow-up attack by 15%. Makes her easy to build, very easy requirement with 15% increase to her main sources of damage. Worse than Durin, but still usable. If you really need the crit rate, you can also use Izumo with 12% attack and 12% crit rate if someone on the team follows the same path as the wearer. So in this case, you would be forced to have someone on the team that is Hunt, which isn't usually a problem. Some of her best teams always has a Hunt character, although there are some alternatives such as using someone like Cypher where it makes it less likely to have a Hunt character on the team. So just make sure someone on your team is Hunt to get the actual effect. For the main stats on the relics, for the body, you're usually always going to run crit rate, but if you are able to reach 100% crit rate without a crit body, then you would use crit damage. For the feet, attack percent is overall better, especially with a Eagle setup, but if you're using Wind Soaring, especially on a follow-up team, getting speed for more turns is good. While your team is going to be the biggest source of generating her stacks, she herself can generate stacks, so I only really recommend using attack percent boots if you are running 4-piece Eagle. For the orb, you can do wind damage or attack percent. Wind damage is better, but if you have a really good attack orb, feel free to use it. And for the link group, you want attack percent. For the subsets, first you prioritize speed if you are running that. Just breakpoint is going to be fine on our teams. If you're running a setup of Feixiao where you run a action advancer for a -1, such as Sunday or Bronya, in that case, be sure she is at least 1 speed higher than your Sunday or Bronya. If you're running 4-piece Eagle with attack percent boots, then you have no reason to really focus on speed, so just ignore the step entirely. Past that, you just focus on generic crit rate, crit damage, attack percent. No matter the build, focus on getting 100% crit rate. I am very serious when I say this. Having not 100% crit rate on Feixiao is tragic. Missing a singular crit is such a big damage fall off. You just want to make sure you do focus on 100% crit rate. Once you reach that, you just get as much crit damage and attack percent as possible. Nowadays, getting your attack around 28 to 2900 minimum if you're able to get it to above 3000 or higher. If you're using attack boots, then obviously you're going to be aiming for like 3200 or higher. That's like around the general ranges you would aim for. Crit damage, you don't have to get a super high stat. Again, you're focusing mainly on crit rate, so you can salvage crit damage a lot, but having generally around 140% is fine. If you do have a crit damage Lightcone or a crit damage body, in that case, you're going to be looking for around 160 to 170% and higher. Now for some general team building ideas, the second slot with Feixiao usually goes to another follow-up character, and right now the best one is none other than the GOAT himself, Astral. He is a part of Feixiao's best team. So for that slot, as a teammate of a follow-up teammate, you want to run Astral. His debuffs are great for Feixiao, his frequency is great as well. And for the support on the team, you used to use Robin, but nowadays you do want to use Tribi instead, because Tribi has better buffs for Astral, actually has frequency to not only charge Feixiao more, but also Astral, since that's very important. And your last slot would go to a sustain. So usually a Venturin would go here, which is still true. If you do have him, you can very much put him there. However, Donning is just as good, if not better, depending on investment and also depending on the battle. If they have a lot of frequency, then Venturin does pull ahead with more frequency of attacks, but they have to be attacking a lot for that to matter. But I'm still putting him anyways because he's the coolest character in the game. So the new Feixiao team would look like this. However, if you are not running Astral in this case and you're still running one of the older characters, previously you would just run someone like Cypher, or if you're really down bad, you would still be using someone like Topaz. So Topaz could go in that slot as well. You could still very much use someone like Mose. Hunt March 7th as well, but mine's not set to hunt, so I'll just pretend that's there. That's just an option. So yeah, the older team would be like that. And rather than Tribi, it would be Robin in this case. So you would still go ahead and put Robin back. So Robin would be here instead. So like the older team would look like that. There's also hyper carry variants of Feixiao where you don't really focus on another character that is a follow-up attacker. So you'd run like a generic actual crit setup. So Feixiao with an action advancer. So in this case, I'm just going to do Sunday. You would use Tribi, and now you can also use Donning, so you can just run a generic setup like this. Feixiao has good frequency and Donning to actually have some charge for Feixiao, and to proc her follow-up attacks, and Sunday gives her a lot of turns to have her own stuff go off, so you would also run something like this. And for any of the other actual teams that were consisting of follow-up characters, so I'm just going to go back to the best one for an example of just this. If you're doing sustainless in any of the setups, the ones you would use are pretty obvious. Like you could still very much use Robin as a sustainless slot here. Cypher is also a good sustainless slot. You could even use someone like RMC. Just depends on what you have available out of those, but usually those would be good slotting options for sustainless setups. That is the full Feixiao 4.2 guide. I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, drop a like, it'd be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all the types of star content. And I'll see you later. Peace out.